Hey YouTube, back in the shop today, working on my outboard a little bit more. I was suffering some performance problems, so I ended up taking the power head off one more time and cracking into this sucker so I can really troubleshoot what's going on. So symptomatically what was happening is this thing ran really good. It actually idled really good too. Starts and idles just fine, ran fine, had spark on all 4 cylinders. And when I get it into water under any kind of load, it just is sluggish and it wants to fall on its face. And even at maximum throttle, so at wide open throttle with both the butterflies open, and this thing was timed right, so I had 38 degrees of timing at wide open throttle, it just felt like it was sluggish and wanted to fall on its face. Okay, and it wouldn't get above 2,000 RPM. So I troubleshooted all the what I would call the easier stuff first, so ignition components, fuel system, and then also making sure that the carburetors were clean so they didn't have any small obstructions or anything, so the screens were all clean and stuff. So it wasn't a fuel starvation issue or a fuel flooding issue, and it really wasn't a spark issue either. My spark plugs were in really good shape. I put a timing light on all of them, and they all seem to have really good spark, and you know, my plugs are nice and tan. All 4 of them are nice and tan, so really no obvious problems there. Also my crank, before I had this all taken apart, I did a compression test and I had 150 psi on all 4 cylinders, which is, you know, that's pretty spot on. And so my rings were, you know, that would indicate that my rings were sealing just fine. And these are actually in really good shape. They're nice and springy and they're loose, right? So they're doing what they're supposed to do. So there is a way to test this without having to, you know, tear down your whole power head. But I was pretty convinced that this was the problem, so I just went ahead and did it. And that the problem ended up being reed valves. So you can actually fog your engine with fogging oil and run it, and then take it up to some RPM, and then, you know, and then just cut the ignition. And if you have a reed valve problem, usually you'll see puffs of smoke, white smoke, come back out the carburetor. But in this case, I kind of had some clues also, because number one, my fuel consumption was just absolutely garbage. Like, this thing was just freaking sucking fuel down. And then the cowling's off, but I had the cowling up on here, and there was just tons of raw unburnt fuel up in there. And I know that my carburetor float valves were working properly, so that was a pretty good sign that I had a lot of blow by. Okay, so I cut this guy down. I already have one of them disassembled. This one had like 4 bad valves on it, and then this is the other side. This one has a couple on it, and there's one that's really obvious that I'll try to find for you. This one right here, so you can actually see that gap on the valve itself. And if I get my finger on it and just give it some light pressure, you can see that closing. So that valve is pretty much open all the time. So the idea here in this one also, you can kind of see it's no bueno, right? So what does that mean? That means that basically your valves aren't working right, so your engine doesn't have the vacuum pulse that it needs to operate properly or make the carburetors operate properly. So on a 2-stroke, reed valves are like super important. These are supposed to be very tight, right? So you're not even supposed to get like I think it's like a 6 or 7 thou gap. You're not supposed to be able to get a feeler gauge into those when they're closed in that closed position. So that was my problem, and quite frankly, if one of these is bad, one of these pedals is bad, you can imagine how these sit. So how these sit in your engine is kind of like this, in between the cylinders, right? So this mounts the crankshaft and sits in between your cylinders. If any one of these 4 pedals are bad on this given side, you've got a leaky valve. So so you got to have all 4 of these guys in each chamber nice and tight. Okay, so I got some new ones coming. They'll be here on Tuesday. I'll do another video when I put all this stuff back together, just to kind of show you how to do that, hopefully without breaking any rings, and just give you an understanding of how these things are all situated. So this is a 1967 Mercury, Kiekhaefer Mercury 650, and my understanding is that the reed valve, the reed block setup on these is pretty similar for this type or this era of model. I think more modern ones still actually have a reed block, so you can service those without having to, you know, gut your whole engine, which would be nice. But this is just a kind of a function of this design. So I'm hopeful that when I get my new parts in and I can put all this stuff back together, that this thing is going to run like a raped ape. And I think I should have that done, wrapped up this week, and hopefully get this back out on the water next weekend here while we still have some good fall weather, and get you some video of how this thing actually works on the boat.